Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So I hope you all have a great spring fling today in a Lindy 500. I hope it's a great day. The weather's beautiful. I want to welcome Calvin Hill from the class of 1965 this morning to talk to us.
No, you don't do anything else. Or just say hello. Sure.
Mr. Hill is one of our most esteemed alumni. In order to introduce him properly, I have some help from a short video, which I'm going to show right now, and some guests. Robert Flug, a peer in the class of 1965, and Glenn Dubin, parent of two Riverdale alums, Jordan and Maya, and Deidre Moore P’15, also a parent of Riverdale alums, and Justin, currently in grade 6. So to start things off, I would like us all to watch this video on Calvin Hill.
Fame, wealth, or even accomplishments. He's not a legend because of his success at Riverdale on the football, basketball, baseball, and track and field teams. Is he a legend because while playing for these teams, he was also an honor student? Or maybe it's because at Yale, he helped lead the 1968 football team to an undefeated season and 2 Ivy League championships. It must have something to do with his 12 seasons as an elite running back in the National Football League, helping the Dallas Cowboys win Super Bowl VI. But this is Calvin Hill we're talking about. And his status as a legend would have to include his work off the field as well, helping troubled athletes find their way, and exploring the relationship between sports and academia through his writing. If the term legend tries to encapsulate the sum total of the immense impact a person has had on the world, Calvin Hill might just be the dictionary definition.
Right.
It is an amazing pleasure in my final month and a half at the school to be able to have Calvin return to us, because Calvin is truly a representation of what we think here is really important, that alchemy of mind, character, and community. I'd like to invite up Robert Flug to class of 1965 to say a few words about Calvin. Robert.
Please save your applause for Calvin. He's doing the one who deserves it. It's kind of funny, coming back to the school, and I was in the hallway before, and I said to somebody out here for the big celebration, and the gentleman said to me, "Are you Calvin Hill?" And it reminded me of a funny thing that happened over 60 years ago. I would meet Calvin after football practice, and we walk up the steps, we go back to the dorm. There's a dormitory here now. And there'd usually be a group of about 5 or 6 kids, maybe 6, 7, or 8 years old, yelling, "Mr. Hill, Mr. Hill, can I have your autograph?" Calvin always, with a big smile on his face, always gave him an autograph. One time we're walking up together, a new group of kids were up there, yelling, Mr. Hill, can I have your autograph?" And I heard Calvin Lewis come back and be saying, "I'm not Calvin Hill. He's Calvin Hill." And I realized he was pointing at me. And the smallest kid in the group, maybe he was 5 years old, stood out in front and said, "You're not Calvin Hill." Calvin asked him, "How do you know he's not Calvin Hill?" The little kid said, "Because Calvin Hill is black, and he wears number 35. Now, if he was a little older, I would have said, if being black and wearing number 35 were our only differentiators, I would have been a really lucky guy. So I'd like to just give you a little background about today. This was, in a sense, going to be a love letter. Excuse me if I get a little choked up. From Calvin's wife to her husband, who she affectionately called Cal, and glowingly referred to him as the love of her life. This was going to be a big celebration of Calvin's years at Riverdale. There's something that Janet very much wanted. And she had been discussing this with Deidre Moore and Dominic and Milton, I think, and somehow she got to me and she said, Flug, I'd like you to be one of the speakers. And I said, well, who are the other speakers? And she told me, Glenn Dubin and Deidre. And I said, I think these people are a lot more accomplished than I am. And Janet said, Flug, you have as big a heart as anybody. Speak from it. So I'm going to try to do that today, and I really hope I can convey, the impact Calvin's had on my life and the rest of my family members as well. So I came to Riverdale in 1963. Calvin had already been here for a couple of years. I came to a big public high school, maybe 400 kids in the class. In Riverdale, our class had 72 guys. And I was really nervous. I was hoping I could fit in. I showed up at the dormitory. My parents dropped me off. Nobody was really saying much. I guess kids were kind of trying to greet each other. They hadn't seen each other all summer and stuff. So I just, shrugged it off and said, I guess when I get to dinner, it'll be better. So I walked to dinner with a guy from Venezuela. He didn't say a word. I found out the next day he really didn't speak English very well, so I didn't take that too personally. When I got to dinner, I thought, this is where all the ice is going to get broken. And a few guys said things like, pass the bread or pass the butter, but that was about it. So I'm walking back to the dorm, my head down, and I'm saying to myself, the kids in this school are the worst. And all of a sudden I hear somebody say, Flug, and then I hear another voice saying, Flug, and I turn around, and it's Calvin and a friend, Jerry Williams. And I said to myself, well, the kids in this school are the worst, but the teachers are great. They were huge. They were so much bigger than I was. And they said, hey, you want to go back to my room and talk? And I realized then that they were students. And that opened up a whole world to me because I felt really accepted. And I felt, wow, this is a place where I'm really fit in and really thrive. And that was the start of a 60-year relationship. Calvin and I have been through an awful lot. I remember Calvin gave us toast at my 60th birthday, and he said, and that was, by the way, 16 years ago. Yeah, it's hard to believe. And he said, Flutie, we're in the fourth quarter now, and this is when all the action starts. And he said maybe we'll get 1, 2, maybe overtimes. A year later, I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was in a coma for 2 weeks on life support. And Calvin was there for me, trying to help me get through a really, really difficult time. Calvin and my father were very close. There was a love between them. away 14 years ago. It was about a month or two before he passed away, he decided he really wanted to give me a lot of life's lessons, kind of cramming everything in, giving me some phrases to really hold on to. And he said, Robert, if you have something nice to say about somebody, say it. Say it to them. Don't wait to say it about them. That I'm going to take your advice today. Calvin, I want to tell you, man, I really love you. This is better than group therapy, thank you. I don't know if we're in the fourth quarter or if we're in the first or second overtime. And I have no idea how much time I have. None of us do. But I want you to know, for whatever time I have left, I want to spend it being your friend and your walking partner. Thank you.
What are you saying?
Now I'd like to introduce you to Glenn Dubin. Glenn.
Thank you, Dominic. Calvin, so nice to see you. So nice to be back here at Riverdale. I have such really incredible memories. Football field where my son played, this gym where my daughter played, soccer field where my daughter played. Really an extraordinary experience for my children and for my wife Eva and I. Talk about extraordinary experiences. I grew up in northern Manhattan in Washington Heights in the 1960s, and I loved football. I was passionate about football. I watched football every Sunday. I watched football every Saturday. And if you knew anything about football growing up in New York City in the 1960s, you knew that in the Bronx, in Riverdale, they had the most extraordinary football team led by a very famous coach, Coach Bertino. And then they had a player come in the 1960s, the early 1960s, I believe 1961 to 1965, Calvin Hill. And they never lost a single game. And the legend of Calvin Hill completely transfixed me. I loved football. I would go up to Inwood to play football. I wanted to play football desperately. And I just marveled at the success that Riverdale had with this extraordinary athlete, Calvin Hill. Fast forward some decades later, and my son, Jordan, is at the Trinity School, doing really well, enjoying all his friends, but he comes to my wife and I and he says, "Pops, I got to transfer." I said, "Why, son?" He said, "I need to play football. I really want to play football the way you do." And I said, "There's only one place to play football. You've got to go to Riverdale." And he said, "Exactly." And so we came up here for an interview, and we met Jenna, we met Dominic, we met John Peasy, and I remember having a conversation with Dominic about my memories of Riverdale and Calvin Hill, and the idea that my son would come to Riverdale to play football where Calvin Hill played football was just extraordinary. A really amazing experience. And he did have an extraordinary experience. And Dominic, recognized how meaningful my memories of Calvin were, and my memories of Riverdale. And he said to me, you know, Calvin came here as a scholarship student. And wouldn't it be nice if there were other student athletes like Calvin that could come to Riverdale? I said, that's a brilliant idea. And so with Dominic's encouragement, my family started the Calvin Hill Scholarship Fund here at Riverdale in honor of Calvin Hill. And furthermore, my son, who to this day, can't stop talking about his incredible memories of being at Riverdale as a student athlete, went on after having a successful career here as a football player and as a student, went on to play football at Harvard. And so much of my memories of Riverdale and the experience of being a student athlete come from meeting Calvin, and come from remembering Calvin's excellence, both as a student and athlete, and as an incredible man. And so it's an honor for me to be back to Riverdale. My children are going to be very happy to hear that I came and spoke to the middle school and upper school assembly. It's a true honor to be here with Calvin, somebody that I've always looked at as a hero. If I'm just pinching myself, 50 years later, here I am introducing Calvin Hill to the middle school and upper school assembly at Riverdale Country School. Calvin has since become a friend. I love him. I love his family, and I'm very honored to be here to introduce him. Calvin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to Eva, yourself, and your family for helping support the scholarship there. Thank you. Deidre Moore P’15, you have a presentation to show us?
Yes.
And then we'll have Calvin and I will have a conversation after Deidre's presented. Deidre.
Thank you. Great. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dominic, to you and your team for inviting me to say a few words today. Thank you also to you and to Ann Grassing, who is the Chief Development Officer here at the school, because it was Ann Grassing who made the connection to myself and the amazing and incredible late Janet Hill. So I appreciate you all for that. Over the past 4 years, as we prepared for the return of Mr. Hill to the Riverdale campus, it became clear that this assembly is a reflection of Mrs. Hill's desire for you all to learn more about her Cal, as she often referred to Calvin Hill. She wanted you to learn more about his character and what he valued most, such as his family and his concern for others. It is my great honor to stand here to pay tribute to you, Mr. Hill, and to say thank you for persevering. Thank you for exhibiting great determination throughout your childhood, your teenage years, your life as a young adult, and as you navigated being one of the few Black students in your predominantly white all-boys boarding school, the Riverdale then. And as you excelled academically and athletically during your time at Yale University. Thank you for your resilience, your persistence that continued as a professional football player in the National Football League between 1969 and 1981. The character traits which you exhibited then still shines through to this very moment. Now, in an effort to pay tribute to the late Mrs. Hill's wishes and to stay true to the storytelling of both Janet Hill and Calvin Hill, storytelling they shared with me over the past 4 years, and most recently, I present photographs provided by the late Mrs. Hill and authorized by the late Mrs. Hill to be shown to everyone here. And it speaks to the personal and professional journey of the legendary Calvin Hill. Mr. Hill, please know that your beloved Mrs. Hill wanted this for you just as much as we wanted to have you to return and to celebrate and honor you. Okay? So, let's see if I can get this right. Okay. Sensitive, huh? Okay. So this would be your beloved, of course. She graduated from Wellesley College. She attended the University of Chicago, having received a master's degree in mathematics education. She was a teacher, a special assistant to the Secretary of the United States Army. She was a researcher in a private consulting firm. And when I see the reference of her being called the General, I often laugh because before she passed, I have to say, I told her, I salute you for all that you do, not just for women, but for women of color. She served on many boards. She was on the board of Duke University. She was on the board of the Kennedy Center, and just to name a few. And she's done amazing life's works. But the reference to the General, apparently Grant Hill, her son, your son, they used to call her the General because apparently she had a lot of rules that he had to live by. But today I still understand that Grant Hill credits his mother for the self-discipline because of all the rules that she and you instilled in him. So, try to be delicate about this. Okay, this would be, of course, Janet Hill, Grant Hill, and Mr. Calvin Hill when Grant Hill was about a year old. And this would be them in 2018, pictures provided by Janet Hill, where she says, where all of us were honored for Black excellence and passing on wisdom and wealth to the next generation. Wait. I'm trying to work this. Okay, wait. Okay, so before we get to those pictures of our sixth graders, this is a photo of Calvin Hill's parents, Henry Hill and Elizabeth Grant. Okay? And I have to point out just a few things, please. His parents were born in South Carolina. His parents were born during a time when, during their lifetime, they faced systemic racism and discrimination that permeated nearly every aspect of their life, from education and employment to housing and health care. His father, a sharecropper, who had never learned to read and write until he met and married Elizabeth Grant. His parents migrated from South Carolina to Baltimore, Maryland, escaping the harsh realities of systemic oppression and discrimination, particularly as it existed in the southern states. His parents, who gave birth to him and raised Calvin Hill in Baltimore, Maryland, and did so during a time where the color of one's skin remained a significant barrier to equal opportunity in our imperfect nation. His father, who at one point, Mr. Hill shares, Mr. Hill must have been about 6 months old when his father purchased a set of encyclopedias from a door-to-door salesman who had been going door-to-door selling the encyclopedias. And it's my understanding that from the moment Calvin started either walking, talking, reading, or writing, or all of the above, his father would always say to him, if there's anything you need to know in life, these books right here is where you're going to get your answers. And so it was early on that his parents had the insight, the foresight, and dedication to learning and teaching you the value of knowledge from an early age. And that's truly admirable. So Calvin Hill, thank you for preserving during your childhood. Speaking of childhood, can you tell who's who? I'm passing really quickly. Front and center, Calvin Hill, okay? These were our then third graders in 2020 when we wanted to, I guess you know who's who. Here's, one more. And here's another one. Who's who? Calvin Hill.
I thought I was cool to like a spit between my teeth.
Okay. And so I'd like to say thank you for persevering as well. And this is a picture of you at the time that you received the scholarship that would afford you an opportunity to attend Riverdale Country School. And there's Calvin Hill standing at 14 years old, standing 6 feet 1 inches and 180 pounds. All right? He was an honor student. He excelled in track and field, baseball, basketball, football, any sport, you name it. And I believe he still has records that are unbroken here at Riverdale today. And that would be his mother sitting front and center as he receives his scholarship. And so what I wanted to point out about this, about being at Riverdale, is Mr. Hill, thank you for persevering during your teenage years, particularly while you were here. Whether it was at the age of 14 during that drive from Baltimore to New York, and you were in the back seat of your parents' car, and as you got closer and closer to Riverdale, fear overcame you at one point, and you started crying, as you indicated. And then you turned to your dad and you said, Dad, or your parents, and you said, I don't want to go. And your dad looked at you and he says, son, it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay, right? And you continued the journey. And then you arrived here at Riverdale with your parents. They started greeting and doing what they needed to do hours before departing. And it's when they were departing, you stood there 6 feet 1 inches, 6 feet 1 inches and 180 pounds, tall and strong, yet vulnerable and sad. And when they were out of your purview after driving so far and leaving you behind, thank you for persevering in your next move, which was going into the wooded area, all right? And you sat down where you said you cried for hours on end. At least it seemed like hours on end. But thank you for getting up and gathering yourself at some point and coming out of that wooded area and allowing yourself to be embraced by those that you mentioned here at Riverdale that were here at the time, that took care of you, that made sure that you were okay because they understood that you were coming from out of town and that you were here amongst maybe 2 other black children in the school. So thank you for persevering during those times, okay? We have a friend, my husband and I, we have a friend who shared with us. He had the occasion to see you play football at Riverdale, and the only image I have in my head is of you going into the end zone with people hanging off of your body, your lower body. That's what he said, that's how good you were. So this is for persevering at Yale. Now, through his hard work at Riverdale, Calvin Hill earned a football and track scholarship to Yale University. He was approached by schools with big football programs, as well as by Ivy League schools like Yale and Harvard. And you mentioned that there were 4 Ivy League schools at the time: Princeton, Dartmouth, Yale, and Harvard, right? And it was Yale and Harvard that were interested in having you come play at their school. You mentioned that you didn't want to go to Harvard to play football because your intentions were to become the first African-American quarterback. And Harvard already had an African-American quarterback, and Yale did not. And so when you arrived at Yale, while you played for 2 days, I think it's the second day of practice you mentioned, that's when you were, I hate to use the word relegated, but relegated to be a fullback or a linebacker and not a quarterback.
A linebacker.
Linebacker, right? And so while that was a difficult time for you, and while it afforded discouragement upon you, and you wanted to quit at times, thank you for persevering and not quitting, all right? And so also, and as you got your start as a fullback or linebacker, you quickly adapted to your new role on the team, using your speed and agility to become one of the team's leading scorers. In your senior year at Yale, you were named to Parade's Magazine's All-American Football Team. That season, Yale's football program also honored you by giving you the Chester J. LaRouche Award, right? The award is given to the senior player who, by his character, academic talents, and concerns for others, does the most for Yale. And Calvin Hill was the award's first recipient. His teammates also honored him by presenting him with the Jordan Oliver Award, which is given to the senior player, other than the team captain, who through his devotion to football, earns the highest respect of his teammates. So thank you for persevering while your college years at Yale. And so now on to the National Football League. Despite all of his successes on the field and the honors he had earned, Calvin still did not seriously consider playing professional football. He expected to graduate with a degree in history, which he did from Yale, and then attend divinity school. However, his successes on the football field and the honors he earned in his final season made him a nationally known player. When he decided to enter the 1968 NFL Draft, he was picked in the first round, 24th overall, by the Dallas Cowboys. After meeting with the legendary Cowboys coach, Tom Landry, Calvin decided to put graduate school on hold. He signed a contract to play professional football with the Cowboys. And while, oops, no, not yet. Okay. And while fans were unhappy, the Cowboy fans that is, at the fact that Calvin Hill from Yale was selected, and they were only unhappy because Yale at the time wasn't producing many professional stars, if I understood correctly, right? And although you had some doubts, the funny thing that I learned, not funny but ironic, is that Calvin enrolled in graduate studies at the Southern Methodist University and took classes in the academic discipline of divinity while playing for the Cowboys. So while he earned the NFL's Offensive Rookie of the Year award during the 1969 season, he also made the team's All-Pro team and played in the Pro Bowl. Calvin showed the Cowboy fans that he belonged on the team in his rookie season. So thank you for persevering at the National Football League. And so this picture right here, I love this picture because I think it speaks volumes. It's the cover of a book that I read, which gave great insight into one's family's legacy in football and basketball, written by Jason Hartfield. Together, Grant and Calvin Hill represent one of the strongest and most unique family legacies in professional sports. Both had outstanding college careers and later were chosen in the first round of the professional draft for their respective sports. They each were honored with awards for their achievements as rookie players and went on to set milestones for their teams. They both looked beyond their sports. Mr. Hill, that meant raising Grant Hill, to be competitive and mentoring him through the early years of his whole career. And for Grant, it meant growing up to become the type of player whom his father could admire and respect. And I think the picture next to this, where it says 1994, Grant's number was retired at Duke University, you couldn't witness a more proud moment of the respect and admiration that Grant Hill is affording his father there, right? And so I'm almost done here. And so I just want to run through this right here. So this would be the next generation of Hills. We have Cal and his granddaughters, Leah being the youngest, and Myra being the oldest. These are both Grant Hill's children. And of course, Grant Hill and his daughters. You have Grant Hill, Calvin Hill, and Lael at the AT&T Sports Stadium. And Lael, these are the athletes of the family, according to the late Mrs. Hill, right? And then you have Grant Hill with his family, the wonderful and incredible Tamia Hill, legendary R&B singer. One more. And then you have the Hill family visiting the Oval Office where Barack Obama was president. And then you also have Calvin Hill, who established the Calvin Hill Daycare Center at Yale University. He also received in 2016 an honorary doctorate degree. And so, just 2 films left. One more. Okay, and these are the lifelong friends to Calvin Hill. You have Robert Flug, you have Jerry Jones and Glenn Dubin. Glenn, thank you for submitting this photo, as well as you, Robert. And then you have the unwavering support of the Riverdale Country School. And they bestowed upon him a commemorative football. Mr. Peasy will be able to speak to that, I'm sure, back in 2015. And lastly, thank you to the Hill family. Thank you for showing our younger generations what generational wealth in knowing what sacrifice, dedication, discipline, and having identity and self-worth looks like. To the Hill ancestors that preceded you and to the generations that follow you, thank you for the insight, foresight, and the tremendous legacy that you left behind, that you're leaving for everyone to benefit from. Okay? So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, God bless you, okay?
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you, Deidre. Now we'd like to have a few minutes where we get to talk to Calvin Hill and
Here we go.
hear some responses to a few questions that I have. So, Calvin, it would be wonderful if you could say why why Riverdale is so important to you. You were telling me the other day that you remember visiting here, and you were in the library, and you started even tearing up as you were in the library. I wonder if you could just tell me why this is such an important place to you.
Well, can you hear me okay? You know, I always apologize when somebody gives me a mic because, you know, although I'm black, I can't sing or dance. And I feel like I should do both. But I get very emotional when I come back to Riverdale. You need to understand, you saw a picture of my mother and father. And my father was illiterate when he married my mother. And she taught him how to read and write. And I can imagine how that opened his world. All of a sudden, he could read street signs. He could read the newspaper. He knew where he was. He could read what was happening. And so he was 20 and she was 19. I came along about 20 years later. You know, I always tell people I was not planned. I just sort of popped up. And one of my earliest memories is my father pointing to those encyclopedias and telling me everything I needed to know was in those encyclopedias. He believed in education. And it was really sort of embarrassing to me for the first 8 years of my education in a public school in Baltimore. My father would always go to the PTA meetings, and I would have to go with him. And he'd always want to be first in line. And he would always go up and say, my name is Henry Hill, and this is my son Calvin, and tell me what I need to do to help you educate him. What role do I have to play? And so education was very, very important in my family. In the 8th grade, and I was getting pretty good grades, and I mean, I was an honor student, and my 8th grade year, I didn't have to take the finals because my grades were so good. But one day I walked in the house, and in my kitchen, we lived in a 4-bedroom house, 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a living room. And in the kitchen was a doctor, Dr. Wade, who had sent his son to Riverdale. And he was telling my parents about an opportunity. There was a scholarship available at Riverdale, and they were looking for another kid, ideally a disadvantaged kid. I didn't realize I was disadvantaged at the time, but they were looking for a kid from Baltimore. They'd had pretty good luck with 2 other kids from Baltimore. And Dr. Wade wanted to know if I was interested in the scholarship. So I said all the things that I should probably say. I was very, very politically correct. I said yes, and sounds good, and blah, blah, blah. Dr. Wade left, and I came down. My mother was fixing dinner. And my father started talking about what a great opportunity this would be for me to go to this school up north in New York, Riverdale. It was going to be a wonderful opportunity. And I just nodded and said the right things. And we talked about it at dinner. The next morning, my father had gone to work, and my mother was fixing breakfast, and she said, have you thought about what we talked about yesterday? And I said, yeah, Mom, I thought about it all night. And you know what? I don't want to go away from school. I like it here. And so my mother said, well, I don't think your daddy's going to make you do anything you don't want to do. And so I thought I was out, I was okay. So I just relaxed the rest of the day. That evening at dinner, my father, first order of business as we were sitting down, well, have you thought more about what we talked about yesterday? And I was about to open my mouth and say, I don't want to go, and I've thought about it, I don't want to do this. And he said, yes, I'm glad you thought about it because we're going to do it. And I didn't have any votes. My father was the boss. And so, it was decided that I was going to apply for a scholarship to Riverdale. And I really didn't want to do it. But I did it, and I applied. I took the exam, and it was kind of cool because in my neighborhood, the whole world in my neighborhood knew that I had won a scholarship to go to a prep school up north in New York. And that was cool. People were sort of singling me out, etc. And that was all great. And I took that picture. In the picture was a guy named Jim Parker. He was a Baltimore Colt. He was an all-pro. He's a Hall of Famer. And he came down and picked me up and took me to take the picture. It was in the Afro-American. My father bought 30 copies of the newspaper. And it was cool until it was D-Day, September 19th, 1961. I had to leave Baltimore and come up to Riverdale. We were on the New Jersey Turnpike near Philadelphia. The radio was on, and we heard the latest release by Ray Charles. Now, Ray Charles, for your information, was he was sort of like Beyonce or, I'm not sure, I'm not really into it now, but he was a big star. And he just released his latest record, Hit the Road Jack. And that's what I was doing, hitting the road jack. And as we got closer and closer to New York, I got more and more afraid. And I remember as we were crossing the George Washington Bridge, and I looked down and I saw Manhattan, and just the enormity of Manhattan, the skyscrapers. I started whimpering in the back. We got on the West Side Highway, and I was whimpering. And then we crossed that bridge into the Bronx, and I remember seeing a sign that said Riverdale. And I just burst out crying. And I told my father, let's turn around. I can't do this. I don't want to go here. He said, no, don't worry, don't worry. We finally got here, and a guy named Peter Loeb, who was a classmate of mine, was assigned to show me around. His first question was, where are you going to go to college? I was in the 9th grade. He said, I'm going to Brown. Now, my mother had told me, she said, now when you get up there, don't show your ignorance. Keep your mouth closed. Keep your eyes open and your ears open, but keep your mouth closed. So I didn't say anything. I had never heard of Brown. After they left, I went into the library and I looked up Brown University. That was the first time I had ever heard of Brown. When I think of Riverdale, I think of all the doors that this place opened for me. Football, I had never played football. When I went to get my equipment in the cage, I think below here, I don't know if it's still the locker room is below, Coach Bertino was behind the cage. And I said, sir, can I get my athletic equipment? He looked at me, he said, who are you? I said, I'm Calvin Hill. I'm in the 3rd form. He says, are you an athlete? I said, well, yes, sir. I play baseball. That was the only sport that I'd really played. He said, have you ever played football? I said, no, sir. I have never played organized football. I've played touch football. He brought me up to this floor. I was 6'1", 170 pounds. He brought me up to this gym and tossed the football around. I could catch the football and I could throw the football, but I'd never played organized football. I'd never put on a helmet or anything like that. And he said, how come nobody told me about you? I said, well, sir, I'm here on an academic scholarship. I'm not here to play sports. That will change over the next 4 years. But when I come here, I think about, Coach Patino. I saw a picture of Mr. Jones. I think about all the people who, took a 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy and helped make him into an 18-year-old mini man. And it's very sobering. For the first 3 weeks that I was here, I didn't say a word. I was so afraid. Kids, I'd never been around anybody other than other black kids. I'd never been in an integrated environment. And I just basically kept my eyes on the prize, I suppose. I kept quiet and I watched other people. And I realized when I come back, I get very misty-eyed because I start thinking about a lot of people. I mean, Riverdale is a beautiful campus. It's a lot of material things, but it's really the people. I think about Mr. John Jones, who was then the head of school. I think about Coach Bertino. I think a lot about Dr. Groningseder. I took Spanish from a woman named Margarita Barrera. And in addition to learning, they were nurturing, and especially a young, scared black kid from Baltimore who had never been away from home except to go to South Carolina. And I realized how lucky I was. I'm talking a little, I'm a Baptist and I went to divinity school, so if I go on, it's because I probably wanted to be a Baptist preacher, and you never give them a microphone. The one thing, and I want to emphasize this, for 4 years, we had chapel back then. When I was here, Riverdale was all boys, and the girls' school was over near the river. I think that's a campus you still use. But we had chapel every morning. And, there were two values that were perpetually emphasized. One was the other fellow first. Mr. Jones talked about that all the time, the other fellow first. And the other one was out of the alma mater. We sang every morning, it is the spirit that quickeneth. I don't know if you know the alma mater now, but it is the spirit that quickeneth, thus saith the Lord. And thus truth saith life, confirming our word. This truth, O Riverdale, help us to live, that spirit, our dream. Spirit over circumstance, ever supreme. Spirit over circumstance, ever supreme. And so there were two things. One was the other fellow first. And I thought about it even in terms of sports. I mean, I ran track, a singular sport. And it's interesting, you can win in track, a long jump or a triple jump, but it's a singular award. But when you're on a team and you share it with people, that's the greatest joy, to be successful and to be able to share it. The other fellow first, to see the joy on your teammates, the joy that they exude when collectively you've done something. And so, I realized that's very important, just being able to share and be a part of something bigger than yourself, and to be able to share it. And then the other thing, and this is something that I've thought about my entire life, and it really made an impression on me, spirit over circumstance, ever supreme. When I first got here as a freshman, I was scared to death. And the only thing that kept me going was I was going to give it my best. I was going to, not give in to my fears. I was going to have the spirit to try to overcome. And that's been my credo for my entire life. When I get involved in things, when I went down to the Cowboys, and I saw some of the biggest guys I'd ever seen in my life, but I realized, they might be better than me, but they couldn't outwork me, and I was going to always have the spirit. And I was never going to let anybody break my spirit. And so I was just focused on the positive. Spirit over circumstance, ever supreme. And so the two things that I think I came away from Riverdale, the idea that it's very important to be a part of something bigger than yourself. It's very important to think about the other fellow first. And the other thing is, spirit over circumstance, ever supreme. And so I would just challenge you to at least think about those two things. The academics will take care of themselves. The various awards will take care of themselves. But the question is, are you willing to share it with somebody? And are you willing to take on a challenge and to be motivated by spirit? Because in my life, it hasn't always been true, but spirit over circumstance works most of the time. This is a very short period of your life. Robert and I are in the fourth quarters of our lives. We like to joke that we're hopefully not too close to the 2-minute warning, and certainly we don't want to be too close to the final gun. But you guys have the rest of your life, And to be sure, with all the things that are happening in this country now, with all the divisiveness, etc., it's going to be up to you. Your generation are the ones who are going to put us back to where we should be. And, you know, sharing, respecting one another, understanding that it's not all about you, and understanding that life presents you with a lot of challenges, but spirit over circumstance ever supreme. Spirit over circumstance ever supreme. You know, thank you very much for having me here.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I can look through all.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah. You want,
Standing ovation. That's what you deserve.
So what I learned today is it's the easiest job in the world to interview Calvin Hill. It just goes, it's wonderful. It's amazing to hear what you had to say. It's so important for everyone to understand the messages that you gave. I had 5 different questions. You answered all the questions, so thank you so much.
Oh, nice.
And it's just great to have you here. We'll remain afterwards if you want to talk. I know we've got to adjourn, you've got to get on with your day, but thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Calvin. Thank you to our guests. Thank you very much for introducing him. Thank you.
oh, thank you.